Queen Camilla decided to surprise Princess Catherine with an unexpected birthday gift, no one anticipated it would trigger the biggest royal crisis in decades. What seemed like a generous gesture between two women finding their place in the monarchy quickly spiraled into a scandal that would test King Charles's leadership, threaten centuries of royal protocol, and expose the dangerous undercurrents still flowing beneath the surface of the modern House of Windsor. The royal sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Windsor Castle as Queen Camilla Parker Bowles stood at the window of her private study, contemplating the delicate wooden box resting on her mahogany desk. Pretty. Inside lay a piece of jewelry that had remained hidden in the royal vaults for nearly 30 years. A stunning sapphire and diamond tiara that once belonged to Diana, Princess of Wales. Catherine, Princess of Wales, would be celebrating her 42nd birthday in 3 days, and Camilla had spent weeks agonizing over the perfect gift. Their relationship had evolved from cautious politeness to genuine mutual respect over the years, especially after Catherine's brave public battle with cancer had touched Camilla's heart in ways she hadn't expected. The stepmother-in-law, who had once been viewed with suspicion by Diana's devoted sons, had gradually found her place within the family structure, but this gesture would test every boundary they had carefully constructed. The tiara, known as the Cambridge Lover's Knot, had been Diana's favorite piece, worn at countless state functions and captured in thousands of photographs that still adorn magazine covers and museum exhibitions worldwide. After Diana's tragic death in 1997, the piece had been quietly stored away, too emotionally charged for public display, too precious for casual use. Even Catherine, despite her position and growing collection of royal jewels, had never been offered this particular treasure. Camilla's fingers traced the edge of the jewelry box as she recalled her conversation with King Charles just 2 weeks earlier. It had been discussing Catherine's remarkable recovery and her gradual return to public duties when Charles had mentioned how proud he was of his daughter-in-law's grace under pressure. "She reminds me so much of Mother sometimes," he had said quietly, referring to the late Queen Elizabeth II. That same sense of duty, that ability to put the monarchy before personal feelings. The comparison had stayed with Camilla, particularly because she knew Charles had wrestled with similar thoughts about Diana during their marriage's troubled final years. Diana had possessed an undeniable connection with the public that had both elevated and complicated the royal family's relationship with their subjects. Catherine seemed to have inherited that same magnetic quality, but with a steadier temperament that had earned her universal respect. Demander, had Camilla had access to the royal collection in ways she had never imagined during her years as the other woman in Charles and Diana's marriage story. The weight of that history had never fully left her shoulders despite the public's gradual acceptance of her role. She had worked tirelessly to prove herself worthy of the position, supporting hundreds of charities, modernizing royal protocols, and serving as Charles's most trusted advisor during his transition to the throne. The decision to offer the Cambridge Lover's Knot to Catherine had not been made lightly. Camilla had consulted with the royal jewelers, the palace historians, and even sought the private counsel of Sarah Ferguson, who had navigated her own complex relationship with royal traditions and expectations. Each conversation had reinforced her belief that this gesture could represent something meaningful, a bridge between past and present, acknowledgement of Catherine's place not just in the family, but in the continuing story of the British monarchy. But Camilla also understood the potential risks. Protocol dictated that significant pieces from the collection required formal approval from multiple sources, including the king himself, the Lord Chamberlain's office, and sometimes even the Privy Council for items of particular historical significance. The Cambridge Lover's Knot certainly qualified as such a piece, given its association with Diana and the emotional resonance it still carried with the British public. More concerning was the potential reaction from William, Diana's eldest son and Catherine's husband. Protocol. While William had publicly supported his stepmother and seemed genuinely fond of her, the subject of his mother's jewelry remained sensitive. Diana's engagement ring for Catherine's proposal, and he had been involved in decisions about which of his mother's pieces Catherine would wear for major occasions, about the Talleyrandses. But the Cambridge Lover's Knot had never been part of those discussions, perhaps because its emotional significance was too overwhelming to address directly. Camilla's private secretary, Angela Thompson, knocked softly on the study door before entering with the morning correspondence. A woman in her 50s, With steel-gray hair and an encyclopedic knowledge of royal protocol, Angela had served the royal household for over 2 decades and had witnessed the evolution of Camilla's role from controversial figure to respected queen consort. "Your Majesty," Angela said, placing the letters on a side table before noticing the jewelry box. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a subtle tightening around her eyes that Camilla recognized as concern. "Is that the piece we discussed yesterday?" Camilla nodded, opening the box to reveal the tiara's brilliance in the morning light. The sapphires seemed to capture and reflect the blue of the sky beyond the windows, while the diamonds created tiny rainbows that danced across the study's walls. Even Angela, who had handled countless priceless artifacts during her career, drew in a sharp breath at the sight. "It's magnificent," Angela whispered, then cleared her throat professionally. "Have you given further thought to the procedural requirements, Your Majesty? The Lord Chamberlain's office will need to be informed, and given the piece's history, there may be additional considerations." The Lord Chamberlain, Sir Andrew Parker, was a meticulous man who had spent his career in various government security roles before taking on the responsibility of managing the royal household's most sensitive affairs. He was respected for his discretion and attention to detail, but he was also known for his strict adherence to established protocols. Any deviation from standard procedures would require compelling justification, and Camilla wasn't certain that a thoughtful birthday gift would meet his threshold for bypassing traditional approval processes.
"I've been considering that," Camilla replied, closing the jewelry box carefully.
"What if we approach this as a private family matter rather than an official royal collection transfer? The piece would still belong to the crown, but Catherine would have the use of it for personal occasions." Angela's expression suggested she was working through the implications of this approach. Royal jewelry existed in various categories. Some pieces belonged personally to individual family members, others were part of the crown estate, and still others fell into gray areas that had been established by custom rather than formal legal frameworks. The Cambridge Lover's Knot had been purchased by Queen Mary in the early 20th century and had passed through various hands before becoming Diana's signature piece. "That could work," Angela said slowly, "but it would still require His Majesty's approval, given the piece's significance. And frankly, Your Majesty, given the current state of public interest in the Princess of Wales following her health challenges, anything involving her is receiving extraordinary scrutiny. The media attention alone, the observation was valid and concerning." The telephone after her cancer treatment had generated intense global attention, with every appearance analyzed and every detail of her recovery celebrated by supporters worldwide. The announcement that she would be wearing Diana's most famous tiara for the first time would create a media frenzy that might overshadow the intended gesture of family unity and respect. Camilla moved to her desk and sat down, gesturing for Angela to take the chair across from her. This conversation required the kind of frank discussion that their working relationship had fostered over the years. Angela was one of the few people who could speak honestly about the potential consequences of royal decisions without worrying about offending sensibilities. "Walk me through the worst-case scenarios," Camilla said. "I need to understand what we might be dealing with if this doesn't go as planned." Angela pulled out her ever-present notebook, a habit from her early days managing royal schedules when every detail had to be tracked and coordinated with military precision. "First, there's the protocol issue. If we bypass the standard approval process and it becomes public knowledge, it could be seen as Your Majesty acting independently of established systems. That could create tension with the Lord Chamberlain's office and potentially with His Majesty, depending on how he views the decision." She paused, consulting her notes, an angle. "While many people would likely view this as a beautiful gesture, others might see it as a beautiful gesture. Others might see it as inappropriate, either too soon after the princess's illness, or as somehow diminishing Princess Diana's memory by transferring her most recognizable piece to someone else." The second concern struck particularly close to home for Camilla, who had spent years carefully navigating public opinion about her relationship to Diana's legacy. She had deliberately avoided comparisons, never attempting to fill Diana's specific role in public life, instead carving out her own distinct identity as queen consort. This gift could be seen as either a gracious acknowledgement of Catherine's importance or as an unwelcome intrusion into territory that should remain Diana's alone. "And third," Angela continued, "there's the family dynamics aspect. Prince William might feel that such a decision should have involved him, given that it's his mother's jewelry and his wife who would be receiving it. Even if he ultimately approves, being presented with a fait accompli could create unnecessary friction. These were the considerations that had kept Camilla awake for several nights as she wrestled with the decision. Her relationship with William had evolved positively over the years, particularly after his father became king, and William had taken on the Prince of Wales title and its accompanying responsibilities. They had developed a working relationship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to the monarchy's success, but it was still built on careful boundaries and clear communication. The irony was not lost on Camilla that her desire to honor Catherine and demonstrate family unity could potentially create the very divisions she hoped to bridge. Royal life was filled with such contradictions. Gestures meant to show support could be interpreted as overreach. Attempts at inclusion could be seen as presumption, and even the most well-intentioned actions could have unintended consequences that rippled through the institution for years. What about approaching Prince William first? Camilla asked, getting his blessing before presenting the gift to Catherine. Angela considered this option, tapping her pen against her notebook. That would certainly address the protocol concerns and eliminate the risk of family tension, but it would also change the nature of the gesture. This, instead of a spontaneous expression of affection from you to the princess, it becomes a more formal, mediated transaction. The emotional impact might be diminished. This was the crux of Camilla's dilemma. She genuinely wanted to surprise Catherine with something meaningful, something that would communicate her respect and affection in a way that words alone could not convey. But Catherine had shown such grace during her illness, such strength in her recovery, and such dedication to her royal duties despite personal challenges. Camilla had watched her navigate public expectations with the same dignity that had made the late Queen Elizabeth so beloved, and she wanted to acknowledge that achievement with something equally significant. But royal life rarely allowed for purely personal gestures. Every action was viewed through the lens of institutional impact, public perception, and historical precedent. The spontaneity that might characterize relationships in other families was filtered through centuries of protocol and the constant awareness that private family moments could become public knowledge with far-reaching consequences. A soft chime from the ornate clock on Camilla's desk reminded her that she had a meeting with the master of the household in 15 minutes to discuss arrangements for an upcoming state dinner. Condemns. The practical demands of royal life continued, regardless of personal deliberations, and decisions about Catherine's birthday gift would have to be balanced with dozens of other responsibilities that required immediate attention. As Angela gathered her materials and prepared to leave, Camilla made a decision that would set in motion a series of events that none of them could have anticipated. Schedule a private meeting with His Majesty for this afternoon. I want to discuss this with him directly before making any final decisions. And please ask the jewelers to prepare a complete provenance report for the Cambridge Lovers' Knot. If we're going to do this, we need to do it properly. Angela nodded, making notes in her book. Shall I also prepare briefing materials about the piece's history and significance? It might be helpful to have all the relevant information in one place for your discussion with His Majesty. Yes, that would be excellent. And Angela, Camilla paused, looking once more at the jewelry box on her desk. This conversation remains confidential until we've made a final decision. I don't want speculation or rumors reaching Catherine before we've determined the best path forward. As Angela left the study, Camilla remained at her desk, weighing the significance of the moment. She had navigated countless sensitive situations during her years in royal life, had learned to balance personal instincts with institutional requirements, and had developed a keen sense of when risks were worth taking. But this decision felt different. Perhaps because it touched on so many complicated aspects of her position. Her relationship with Diana's memory, her role as stepmother to William and Harry, her connection to Catherine and her responsibility as queen consort to support the monarchy's future. The Cambridge Lovers' Knot represented more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of Diana's enduring influence on the royal family, a testament to the power of personal style and royal representation, and a reminder of the complex emotional undercurrents that still flowed beneath the surface of the House of Windsor's public image. By offering it to Catherine, Camilla was making a statement about continuity and change, about honoring the past while embracing the future. But symbols were powerful things in royal life, and their meanings could shift unexpectedly depending on context and interpretation. What Camilla intended as a gesture of respect and inclusion could be received very differently by various audiences: the public, the media, other members of the royal family, and even Catherine herself. The challenge was to navigate these multiple perspectives while staying true to her original impulse to do something meaningful for someone she had come to genuinely care about. The decision about Catherine's birthday gift would ultimately reveal much about the current state of the royal family: their ability to balance tradition with personal relationships, their capacity to handle sensitive historical legacies, and their skill at managing public perception while pursuing private family connections. For Camilla, it represented an opportunity to define her role as queen consort, not just through official duties, but through the more subtle work of nurturing family relationships and managing the emotional complexities that came with their unique position in British society. As she prepared for her afternoon meeting with King Charles, Camilla understood that whatever decision they reached would become part of the ongoing story of the modern monarchy, another chapter in the complicated narrative of how personal relationships intersect with institutional responsibilities in royal life. The Cambridge Lovers' Knot would either become a beautiful symbol of family unity or a reminder of how even the most well-intentioned gestures could create unexpected complications in the rarefied world of the British royal family. King Charles III sat in his private study at Clarence House, surrounded by the familiar comfort of his personal books, watercolor paintings, and the gentle afternoon light filtering through windows that overlooked his beloved organic garden. The room reflected his lifelong interest in architecture, spirituality, and environmental conservation, with first edition books on Islamic art sharing shelf space, with volumes on sustainable farming, and philosophical treatises that had shaped his worldview over decades of preparation for the throne. When Camilla entered the study carrying a small leather portfolio and looking unusually serious, Charles immediately set aside the correspondence he had been reviewing about upcoming Commonwealth visits. After 40 years of marriage and partnership, he could read her moods with extraordinary accuracy, and today's expression suggested something more complex than their usual discussions about charity patronages or state dinner arrangements. "You look as though you're carrying the weight of the crown jewels," Charles said with gentle humor, gesturing for her to take the leather chair beside his desk. "What's troubling you, my dear?" Camilla settled into the chair and placed the portfolio on the small table between them. "Actually, that's not too far from the truth. I need to discuss something with you about Catherine's birthday gift, and I suspect you're not going to find this conversation as straightforward as either of us might hope." Charles leaned back in his chair, giving Camilla his full attention. It was built on frank communication and mutual support through countless challenging situations. From the difficult years before their marriage to the complex transition period after his mother's death and his own coronation. The discussion about family dynamics and her instinct for navigating the subtle emotional currents that ran beneath the surface of royal life. "I'm listening," he said simply, recognizing that this was one of those moments when his role as husband needed to take precedence over his position as king, at least until he understood the full scope of what they were discussing. Camilla opened the portfolio and withdrew several documents: historical reports, photographs, and a detailed provenance analysis that Angela had prepared with characteristic thoroughness. "I've been thinking about giving Catherine the Cambridge Lovers' Knot tiara for her birthday. I know it's complicated given its history with Diana, but I believe it could be a meaningful gesture that demonstrates our respect for her place in the family and her service to the crown." Charles felt his breath catch slightly as the implications of this proposal began to register. The Cambridge Lovers' Knot was perhaps the most emotionally charged piece in the entire royal collection. Inextricably linked with Diana's public image and the turbulent period of their marriage that had played out so painfully in the international media. Even 27 years after Diana's death, anything connected to her memory required careful consideration and sensitive handling. "Tell me what you're thinking," Charles said, reaching for the photographs that showed the tiara in all its magnificent detail. The images brought back a flood of memories. Diana wearing the piece at state banquets, gala performances, and official portraits that had defined the aesthetic of the 1980s and early 1990s royal family. She had loved the tiara not just for its beauty, but for what it represented about her position and her ability to embody the glamour that the public expected from their Princess of Wales. Camilla had clearly anticipated this reaction and had prepared her thoughts carefully. Catherine has earned a place of real respect within the family and with the public, particularly after her handling of her illness and recovery. She's never presumed to compete with Diana's memory, but she's carved out her own distinct role that honors the position while being authentically her own. I think offering her this piece would acknowledge that achievement and demonstrate that we see her as Diana's worthy successor in the role of Princess of Wales. The reasoning was sound, Charles had to admit, but it also opened numerous potential complications that would need to be carefully considered. His relationship with Diana's memory had evolved over the years from guilt and regret to a more peaceful acceptance of their shared history and their ongoing connection through William and Harry. He had worked hard to ensure that his sons felt comfortable discussing their mother with him, and he had supported their efforts to keep her memory alive in appropriate ways. But the Cambridge Lover's Knot represented something more than just another piece of royal jewelry. It had been Diana's signature piece, the tiara that photographers automatically associated with her, and its symbolic weight extended far beyond its monetary or artistic value. Personal memories of difficult times, arguments about royal duties, media attention, and the growing distance that had ultimately led to their divorce. "Have you considered William's perspective on this?" Charles asked, studying his wife's face carefully. "I can imagine he might have strong feelings about his mother's most recognizable piece being worn by someone else, even someone he clearly loves and respects as much as Catherine." This was the question Camilla had been wrestling with for weeks, and she appreciated that Charles had identified the core emotional challenge immediately. "That's exactly what concerns me most. I don't want this gesture to create any tension with William, but I also think there could be a case to be made that Catherine, wearing the tiara, would honor Diana's memory rather than diminish it. She's raising Diana's grandchildren. She's taken on Diana's former title, and she's demonstrated the same kind of connection with the public that Diana had." Charles stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where he had spent countless hours over the years, working through complex problems and difficult decisions. The view had remained constant through decades of change, providing a sense of continuity that had become increasingly important as he navigated the responsibilities of kingship. "There's also the question of precedent," he said thoughtfully. "Already, if we make this kind of exception to normal protocols for transferring significant pieces from the collection, it could create expectations for other similar situations. Every decision we make about the crown's historical artifacts becomes part of the record that future monarchs will have to consider." This was exactly the kind of institutional thinking that made Charles an effective king, but sometimes complicated his role as a father and grandfather. He had spent his entire life learning to balance personal relationships with the demands of the monarchy, and he understood better than most how individual choices could have far-reaching consequences for the institution's future stability. Camilla returned to her chair and pulled out another document from the portfolio, a timeline that Angela had prepared showing how other significant royal jewelry transfers had been handled in the past. "I've been researching precedents, actually. There have been several instances where pieces have been transferred between family members outside of formal inheritance processes. Your mother gave several important pieces to various family members during her lifetime, usually to mark significant occasions or to acknowledge particular service to the crown." Charles reviewed the timeline, recognizing several of the transfers mentioned and remembering the careful thought that had gone into each decision. The late Queen Elizabeth II had been particularly thoughtful about jewelry, understanding its symbolic power and its ability to communicate messages about family relationships and royal continuity. She had also been careful to ensure that such transfers supported the monarchy's stability rather than creating unnecessary complications. "What does Angela think about the practical aspects?" Charles asked. "I assume she's considered the protocol requirements and the potential media implications." "She's identified several potential challenges," Camilla admitted. "The Lord Chamberlain's office would normally need to approve such a transfer, and there could be questions about whether this should go through formal channels. There's also the concern about media attention and public reaction, particularly given the intense interest in Catherine's return to public duties." Charles nodded, recognizing these as legitimate concerns that would need to be addressed regardless of their ultimate decision. Sir Andrew Parker ran an efficient operation, but he was also protective of established procedures and would likely want to ensure that any deviation from normal protocols was properly justified and documented. "And what about Catherine herself?" Charles asked. "Have you given thought to how she might react to receiving such a significant piece?" "She's always been very thoughtful about not overstepping boundaries or presuming too much about her position. This question touched on one of Camilla's deepest concerns about the entire proposal. Catherine had demonstrated remarkable sensitivity to the emotional complexities of her position, particularly regarding Diana's legacy and her own relationship with public expectations. Actor, she had never sought to emulate Diana directly, instead developing her own authentic approach to royal duties that honored the position while reflecting her personal style and interests. That's perhaps the most important consideration, Camilla said. Catherine might feel uncomfortable receiving such a significant piece, or she might worry that wearing it would invite unfavorable comparisons to Diana. She's worked so hard to establish her own identity as Princess of Wales, and I wouldn't want this gift to undermine that achievement. Charles returned to his desk and sat down, pulling out a leather-bound notebook where he kept private thoughts about family matters and sensitive royal business. He had developed the habit during his years as Prince of Wales as a way of working through complex problems and recording his decision-making process for future reference. "Let me ask you something directly," he said, looking at his wife with the kind of serious attention that their most important conversations required. "What is your primary motivation for wanting to give Catherine this particular piece? Is it about honoring her service, demonstrating family unity, making a statement about continuity between past and present, or something else entirely?" The question forced Camilla to examine her own motivations more deeply than she had during her initial deliberations. She had been focusing on the practical and protocol considerations, but Charles was asking her to identify the emotional and symbolic intentions underlying the gesture. "I think it's all of those things," she said slowly, "but primarily it's about demonstrating that Catherine has earned her place not just in the family, but in the historical continuum of the monarchy. She's proven herself through her service, her character, and her handling of personal challenges in a way that honors the best traditions of royal duty. The Cambridge Lover's Knot represents a kind of recognition that she's worthy of wearing Diana's crown, metaphorically speaking." Charles made notes in his book, capturing the essence of Camilla's reasoning while also recording his own initial thoughts about the proposal's merits and risks. This conversation would likely be the first of several discussions before they reached a final decision, and he wanted to ensure that all perspectives were properly considered. "There's another dimension to think about," he said after a moment. "How might Harry react to learning that Catherine is wearing his mother's tiara? I know the relationship has been strained, but Diana's memory is still something that connects all of us, and his feelings would need to be considered as well." The mention of Harry brought another layer of complexity to the situation that Camilla had been trying to avoid confronting directly. Harry's relationship with the royal family had become increasingly distant since his marriage to Meghan and their subsequent departure from active royal duties. His memoir and various interviews had revealed deep hurt and resentment about multiple family issues, and anything involving his mother's memory would likely be particularly sensitive. "I thought about that," Camilla said quietly. "And honestly, I'm not sure there's any decision we could make that wouldn't potentially create some kind of reaction from Harry. He might see this as inappropriate, or he might view it as a slight to Meghan, or he might interpret it in ways we can't anticipate. At some point, we have to make decisions based on what we think is best for the family members who are actively participating in royal life." This was one of the most painful aspects of the current family situation. The need to make decisions about traditions, ceremonies, and symbolic gestures, while considering the feelings of family members who had chosen to step away from their royal roles. But Charles had struggled with this balance throughout the period of Harry and Meghan's departure, trying to maintain family relationships while also protecting the institution's stability and supporting the family members who remain committed to royal service. "What if we approach this differently?" Charles suggested. "Instead of making this decision in isolation, what if we involved William in the process? We could present the idea to him as something we're considering and ask for his input about both the gesture itself and the best way to handle it with Catherine." Camilla considered this approach, recognizing its potential advantages and disadvantages. Involving William would certainly address the protocol concerns and eliminate the risk of family tension, but it would also change the nature of the gift and potentially create additional complications if William had reservations about the idea. "That could work," she said slowly, "but it would require William to become complicit in keeping the surprise from Catherine, assuming he agrees with the gesture. And if he has concerns about the idea, we'd need to respect his feelings even if we disagree with his reasoning." Charles nodded. understanding that this approach would essentially give William veto power over the decision, which might not be unreasonable given that the tiara had belonged to his mother and his wife would be the recipient. But it also meant accepting that their original impulse to surprise Catherine with a meaningful gesture might not be possible to execute as originally envisioned. The conversation was interrupted by a discreet knock on the study door, followed by the entry of Charles's private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, carrying a red leather dispatch box that contained urgent correspondence requiring the king's immediate attention. Sir Clive was a career diplomat who had served Charles for over a decade, first as Prince of Wales and now as king, and his presence indicated that other royal business required attention. "I apologize for the interruption, Your Majesty," Sir Clive said with formal politeness. "The Foreign Secretary needs a response to the Commonwealth Summit proposals by end of business today, and there are several other items that require your signature before tomorrow's Privy Council meeting." Charles looked at the dispatch box and then at Camilla, recognizing that their conversation about Catherine's gift would need to be continued later. The demands of royal life rarely allowed for extended private discussions, and urgent government business always took precedence over family matters, regardless of their personal importance. "We'll need to continue this conversation tomorrow," he told Camilla. "But I think your instinct to discuss this with William first is probably the right approach. Why don't you arrange a private meeting with him, and we can reconvene after you've gauged his reaction to the idea?" Camilla gathered her materials and prepared to leave, but paused at the door to address one final concern that had been weighing on her mind. "Charles, what if this entire situation is more complicated than we're anticipating? What if there are aspects of Diana's relationship with the Cambridge lovers knot that we don't fully understand? Or what if there are reasons why it's remained in storage all these years that go beyond simple protocol?" It was a thoughtful question that demonstrated Camilla's growing sophistication about the hidden complexities of royal life. After decades of marriage to Charles, she had learned that the royal family's history contained layers of meaning and significance that were not always immediately apparent, and that seemingly straightforward decisions could have roots in much deeper and more complicated dynamics. Charles paused in opening the dispatch box and looked at his wife with appreciation for her insight. "That's exactly the kind of question we need to explore before making any final decisions. Perhaps we should also speak with some of the staff who were working here during Diana's time. They might have perspectives or memories that could inform our thinking." As Camilla left the study, both she and Charles understood that what had begun as a simple desire to give Catherine a meaningful birthday gift had evolved into something much more complex, a decision that would require careful consideration of family dynamics, royal protocols, historical significance, and public perception. The Cambridge lovers' knot had become a symbol not just of Diana's memory, but of all the complicated emotions and relationships that continued to shape the royal family's interactions nearly 3 decades after her death. The decision they ultimately made would reveal much about their ability to balance personal relationships with institutional responsibilities, their skill at managing sensitive historical legacies, and their capacity for making choices that honored both the past and the future of the British monarchy. Prince William stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his private office in Kensington Palace, watching his children play football on the carefully maintained lawn below. The sight of George, Charlotte, and Louis, engaged in their weekend morning routine, provided a welcome moment of normalcy before what he suspected would be a complicated conversation with his stepmother. Camilla had requested a private meeting with unusual formality, asking to discuss a family matter of some sensitivity that required his input before any decisions were made. The phrasing alone had been enough to put William on alert. In their family, requests for formal discussions about sensitive matters typically meant that someone was contemplating an action that could have significant implications for multiple people. When Camilla arrived at Kensington Palace, William noticed immediately that she carried the same leather portfolio he had seen her with at recent family gatherings, and her expression held the kind of serious determination that he had learned to associate with his stepmother's most carefully considered initiatives. Prevalent, their relationship had evolved considerably over the years, particularly since his father's accession to the throne, and he had developed genuine respect for Camilla's judgment and her commitment to supporting the monarchy. "Thank you for making time for this conversation," Camilla said as they settled into the comfortable chairs in William's private sitting room. The space reflected his and Catherine's taste for understated elegance, with family photographs sharing space with artwork that the children had created and books that revealed their personal interests in history, conservation, and child development. Of course, William replied, noting the portfolio on the table between them. Your message suggested this was something important, and you know I value your counsel on family matters. D. What's on your mind? Camilla opened the portfolio and withdrew the same document she had shown Charles, but she also pulled out a small leather jewelry box that immediately captured William's attention. Even before she opened it, something about the size and shape triggered a memory that made his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. I've been giving considerable thought to Catherine's upcoming birthday, Camilla began, and I wanted to discuss a possible gift with you before making any final decisions. I think what I'm contemplating could be meaningful, but it's also the kind of gesture that could have implications beyond my original intentions. She opened the jewelry box, revealing the Cambridge lover's knot in all its brilliant detail. The sapphires caught the morning light streaming through the windows, and the diamonds created tiny prisms that danced across the room's pale walls. For William, seeing the tiara was like encountering a vivid memory made physical. Countless images of his mother wearing this exact piece flashed through his mind with startling clarity. William's first reaction was purely emotional. A sudden rush of grief and longing that he had learned to manage but never entirely eliminated. The tiara was so intimately connected with his childhood memories of his mother preparing for state occasions. The ritual of getting dressed for formal events that had been one of the few times during his youth when he and Harry had been allowed into their parents' private spaces to witness the transformation from mother to Princess of Wales. I remember this piece very well, William said quietly, his voice carrying undertones that Camilla recognized as both sadness and something deeper, perhaps the complex mixture of love, loss, and protective instinct that had shaped his relationship with his mother's legacy for nearly 3 decades. I thought you might, Camilla replied gently. That's exactly why I wanted to discuss this with you before making any decisions. This tiara means something specific to your family's history, and Catherine wearing it would represent a kind of continuity that could be beautiful or could be problematic, depending on how it's handled and how people react to it. William stood up and walked to the window, needing a moment to process both the proposal and his own reaction to it. Outside, his children were still playing, their laughter creating a soundtrack of innocence and joy that contrasted sharply with the emotional complexity of the conversation taking place inside the palace. Tell me what you're thinking, he said, turning back to face Camilla. What made you consider giving Catherine this particular piece? Camilla had prepared for this question and had spent considerable time examining her own motivations to ensure she could present them honestly and clearly.
Catherine has demonstrated such grace and strength, particularly during her recent health challenges.
She's earned a place of real respect within the family and with the public, and she's done it while being authentically herself rather than trying to imitate anyone else. I thought offering her your mother's most beautiful tiara could be a way of acknowledging that achievement. The reasoning resonated with William's own observations about his wife's evolution into her role as Princess of Wales. Catherine had indeed managed to honor the position while creating her own distinct identity, and she had handled the pressure and expectations with remarkable composure. But the idea of her wearing his mother's signature piece triggered complicated emotions that William needed to examine carefully. There's something I need to tell you, William said, returning to his chair and looking directly at Camilla with unusual intensity. Today. Something about that tiara that might change how you think about this entire proposal. Camilla felt a slight chill of apprehension, recognizing that William's tone had shifted to something more serious and potentially troubling. In her research about the Cambridge lover's knot, she had focused on its history, provenance, and public significance, but she had not delved deeply into the private family dynamics that might surround the piece. I'm listening, she said simply, preparing herself for information that might complicate or completely undermine her original idea. William took a deep breath, clearly gathering himself to share something that was personally difficult and potentially sensitive for multiple family members. My mother had a complicated relationship with that tiara. She loved how it looked and what it represented about her position, but she also found it physically uncomfortable to wear. The weight distribution caused her frequent headaches, and the mechanics of how it attached to her hair often left her with genuine pain after long events. He paused, looking at the tiara with a mixture of appreciation and something that might have been remembered frustration. But more than that, toward the end of her marriage to my father, That tiara became associated with some of the most difficult and publicly scrutinized events of her life. She wore it to state occasions where she and Dad were barely speaking to each other, to gala events where the media was speculating about their relationship problems, and to formal functions where she had to maintain perfect composure while dealing with private heartbreak. Camilla felt her understanding of the situation shift dramatically as William's revelation added layers of complexity she had not anticipated. The Cambridge Lovers' Knot was not simply a beautiful piece with happy associations. It was also connected to some of the most painful periods of Diana's life and the most difficult challenges of her marriage to Charles. By the time of their separation, William continued, "I remember my mother telling me that she sometimes felt the tiara was like a beautiful prison, gorgeous to look at, but associated with obligations and expectations that had become emotionally unbearable. She never said she hated it, but there were definitely times when putting it on represented everything about royal life that felt constraining rather than empowering." This perspective on the tiara's significance was completely absent from the historical reports and provenance documents that Camilla had reviewed, but it made perfect sense given what she knew about Diana's struggles during the final years of her marriage. The most public and glamorous aspects of royal life had often been the most emotionally challenging for Diana, particularly when her private relationships were deteriorating. "I had no idea about any of that," Camilla said honestly. "The research I did focused on the tiara's artistic and historical significance, but not on your mother's personal experience with wearing it. This completely changes how I think about offering it to Catherine." William appreciated Camilla's directness and her willingness to reconsider her original plan based on new information. It was exactly the kind of flexibility and thoughtfulness that had earned his respect over the years and had helped build their current relationship of mutual trust and support. "But here's the thing," William continued, and his tone suggested that the conversation was about to take another unexpected turn. "Despite all of those associations, I've actually been thinking that it might be time for that tiara to have new memories attached to it. Catherine's relationship with royal life is so different from what my mother experienced. She chose this role with full knowledge of what it entailed. She has the support system that my mother sometimes lacked, and she's approaching her duties with a sense of partnership rather than isolation." Camilla felt her breath catch as she realized that William was not rejecting her proposal, but was instead offering a more complex and thoughtful perspective on its potential significance. His understanding of the tiara's complicated history actually seemed to be leading him towards supporting the idea rather than opposing it. "Are you saying you would support Catherine wearing the Cambridge Lovers' Knot?" Camilla asked, wanting to be absolutely clear about William's position before drawing any conclusions. "I'm saying that I think my mother would have wanted her jewelry to bring joy rather than pain to the women who wear it after her," William replied. "Catherine has shown that she can honor traditions while creating her own positive associations with royal life. Maybe giving her that tiara would be a way of transforming its legacy from something that represented constraint and difficulty into something that represents choice, strength, and authentic service." The conversation had taken a direction that Camilla had not anticipated, but that felt profoundly right as soon as William articulated it. Instead of simply transferring a beautiful piece from one generation to the next, they were potentially creating an opportunity to heal some of the painful associations that surrounded one of the royal collection's most significant items. "There would need to be some practical considerations," William continued, warming to the ideas he spoke. "Catherine would need to know about the tiara's history with my mother, both the positive and the challenging aspects, decision about whether she wants to take on that symbolic weight along with the piece itself." This was exactly the kind of thoughtful approach that Camilla had hoped William would bring to the conversation, and it demonstrated his maturity about his mother's legacy and his commitment to supporting Catherine in her role. Rather than treating Diana's memory as something fragile that needed to be protected from any change, he was approaching it as something dynamic that could evolve and grow through new experiences and associations. "I agree completely," Camilla said. Catherine should understand what she would be receiving and what it might represent to different people. But I also think you're right that she has the strength and perspective to handle that complexity in a way that honors your mother while creating new positive associations." They spent the next hour discussing practical aspects of the proposal, how to present the idea to Catherine, whether to involve Charles in the conversation, how to handle potential media attention, and what kind of occasion might be appropriate for Catherine to first wear the tiara publicly. Each detail required careful consideration, but William's support for the basic concept made all of the logistical challenges feel manageable. As their conversation drew to a close, William made an observation that would prove to be prophetic about the challenges they would face in the coming days. There's one aspect of this situation that we haven't fully discussed: how other people might react to learning that Catherine is wearing my mother's tiara. The public, the media, other family members, people who have strong feelings about my mother's legacy. Camilla nodded, recognizing that public reaction was indeed the variable that would be most difficult to predict or control. Do you think most people would see this as appropriate, or might there be significant resistance to the idea? I think it will depend entirely on how it's presented and what kind of narrative develops around it, William replied thoughtfully. If it's framed as a gesture of family unity and respect, most people will probably respond positively. But if it gets positioned as somehow erasing or replacing my mother's connection to the piece, there could be pushback from people who feel protective of her memory. This insight highlighted one of the most challenging aspects of any decision involving Diana's legacy: the intense public ownership that people still felt about her memory and her belongings. Diana had touched people's lives in ways that created lasting emotional connections, and any change to how her personal items were used or displayed could trigger reactions that went far beyond normal royal watching. As Camilla prepared to leave Kensington Palace, she felt both relief and apprehension about the direction their conversation had taken. William's support for the basic idea was encouraging, but his warnings about public reaction were sobering reminders of how quickly well-intentioned gestures could become complicated public relations challenges. "There's one more thing," William said as they reached the door of his office. "If we decide to move forward with this, I'd like to be the one to give Catherine the tiara, with you present as a witness to the gesture. It feels important that this gift come from our entire family rather than from any individual person." The suggestion was perfect, addressing both the emotional significance of the gesture and the practical need to demonstrate family unity around the decision. It would also ensure that Catherine understood the gift as an expression of collective support rather than as any individual's personal agenda. As Camilla drove back to Clarence's house, she reflected on how much more complex and meaningful the conversation had become than she had originally anticipated. What had begun as a simple desire to give Catherine a beautiful birthday gift had evolved into an opportunity to heal old wounds, create new traditions, and demonstrate the royal family's capacity for growth and change. But she also understood that the real challenges lay ahead: presenting the idea to Catherine in a way that honored both the tiara's history and her own agency, managing the practical aspects of the transfer, and preparing for public reaction that could range from celebration to criticism, depending on factors beyond their control. The Cambridge Lover's Knot represented much more than jewelry now. It had become a symbol of the royal family's ability to balance respect for the past with hope for the future. And the decision about Catherine's birthday gift would test their skill at managing both the private emotions and public expectations that surrounded their every action. Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood before the antique mirror in her private dressing room at Adelaide Cottage, carefully adjusting the Cambridge Lover's Knot tiara for what would be its first public appearance in 27 years. The weight of the piece felt substantial against her head, and she could understand immediately why Diana had sometimes found it uncomfortable during long events. But beyond the physical sensation was an emotional weight that Catherine had not fully anticipated. When William and Camilla had presented her with the tiara just 3 days earlier, the birthday presentation had been deeply moving, with William explaining his mother's complex relationship with the piece, while Camilla stood beside him radiating genuine warmth and support. Catherine had been touched by the gesture's symbolism and the clear thought that both of them had put into making the offer meaningful rather than presumptuous. She had accepted the honor of wearing Diana's most famous tiara with grace and gratitude, understanding that she was receiving not just a piece of jewelry, but a kind of blessing from the family about her place in their ongoing story. But now, preparing for tonight's state banquet honoring the President of France, Catherine found herself questioning whether she was ready for the intense public attention that would inevitably accompany her first appearance in the tiara. The past 3 days had been filled with practical preparations, fittings with the royal jewelers, consultations with her dresser about how to secure the piece properly, and careful coordination with the palace's communications team about how to handle media inquiries. What no one had anticipated was the leak that had appeared in that morning's tabloid press, revealing not just that Catherine would be wearing the Cambridge lover's knot, but also providing details about the private family discussions that had led to the decision. Someone with access to sensitive information had shared enough specifics to make it clear that this was not idle speculation, but based on actual knowledge of the gift and the conversations surrounding it. The headline in The Sun had been particularly inflammatory. Kate to where dead dies Crown Palace insiders reveal secret family drama over Diana's most sacred tiara. The article contained quotes from unnamed sources suggesting that there had been significant disagreement within the royal family about the appropriateness of giving Catherine the tiara, and that some family members viewed the gesture as disrespectful to Diana's memory. Even more troubling was a companion piece in the Daily Mail that included photographs of Diana wearing the tiara, alongside detailed speculation about Catherine's motivations for accepting such a controversial gift. The article suggested that Catherine was attempting to position herself as Diana's successor in ways that went beyond her official role, and that the timing of the revelation, just as she was returning to full public duties after her cancer treatment, was calculated to maximize public attention and sympathy. Catherine's press secretary, Hannah Coxworth-White, had called an emergency meeting that morning to discuss how to respond to the media coverage and to assess whether tonight's state banquet should proceed as planned or whether alternative arrangements needed to be considered. The meeting had included senior palace officials, communications specialists, and representatives from the king's household, reflecting the seriousness with which they viewed the potential implications of the media storm. The coverage is certainly challenging, Hannah had said during the meeting, but it's not uniformly negative. Several outlets are framing this as a beautiful gesture of family unity, and there's significant public support on social media for the princess wearing Diana's tiara. The problem is that the leak has created a narrative of secrecy and controversy that overshadows the original intention. Sir Clive Alderton, representing the king's interests, had been more blunt in his assessment. The leak itself is the most serious issue here. Someone with access to private family conversations has violated confidentiality in a way that could have lasting implications for how we handle sensitive matters in the future. We need to identify the source and address the breach immediately. But the immediate priority was determining how to proceed with the evening's event. The French president and his wife were already in London. The state banquet had been planned for months with elaborate attention to protocol and diplomacy, and changing Catherine's appearance at this point would create exactly the kind of last-minute drama that the palace typically worked hard to avoid. But Catherine herself had been adamant that she would not allow media speculation to dictate her choices. I accepted this tiara with full knowledge of its significance and its potential to generate attention, she had told the assembled officials. If I change my mind now because of negative press coverage, it suggests that the original decision was somehow inappropriate, which I don't believe it was. Her determination to proceed had been supported by William, who had arrived at the emergency meeting with his own concerns about how the leak had occurred and what it suggested about security around family discussions. The problem isn't Catherine wearing the tiara, he had said firmly. The problem is that someone violated our privacy and twisted a meaningful family gesture into something controversial for their own purposes. Now, just hours before the state banquet, Catherine was experiencing the full weight of public attention that came with wearing one of the most recognizable pieces in the royal collection. Her dresser, Maria Santos, had worked for the royal family for over 15 years and had helped Catherine prepare for countless formal occasions, but even she seemed unusually focused and careful as she made final adjustments to the tiara's positioning. "It looks magnificent on you, Your Royal Highness," Maria said quietly, stepping back to assess the overall effect. "Princess Diana would be proud to see how beautifully you wear it." The comment was meant to be encouraging, but it also highlighted the impossible standard that Catherine felt she was being held to, not just wearing the tiara appropriately, but somehow living up to Diana's legacy while maintaining her own authentic identity. The comparison was inevitable, but it was also unfair to both women given their different personalities, circumstances, and approaches to royal life. Catherine's reflection was interrupted by a knock on the dressing room door, followed by William's voice asking permission to enter. When she opened the door, she saw not just her husband, but also King Charles and Queen Camilla, all dressed in their formal evening wear and looking unusually serious. "We wanted to see how you were feeling about tonight before the event begins," Charles said, studying Catherine's appearance with the kind of careful attention he brought to all matters involving royal presentation and public perception. 3. You look absolutely radiant, but we know this has become more complicated than any of us anticipated. Catherine appreciated their support, but she could also sense underlying tension in the group that suggested the day's media coverage had created concerns beyond what she had been told about during the morning meeting. Is there something else I should know about the situation? Have there been new developments since this morning? The three of them exchanged glances in a way that confirmed Catherine's suspicion that additional complications had emerged. It was Camilla who spoke first, her expression reflecting both frustration and genuine concern for Catherine's well-being. We've received word that Harry has issued a statement to the American media about the tiara situation, Camilla said carefully. He's expressed concerns about the decision and suggested that he wasn't consulted about something involving his mother's personal belongings. The news hit Catherine like a physical blow, not just because of what Harry's intervention would mean for tonight's event, but because of what it revealed about the ongoing fractures within the family that she had hoped were gradually healing. Harry's decision to make a public statement rather than addressing concerns privately represented exactly the kind of external pressure and family division that she had most wanted to avoid. What exactly did he say? Catherine asked, though part of her didn't want to know the details if they were going to make her feel worse about a decision she couldn't change at this point. William's expression had hardened in the way that Catherine recognized as his reaction to feeling betrayed or blindsided by someone he cared about. He said that major decisions about Diana's belongings should involve both of her sons, and he questioned whether the timing of this revelation was appropriate given the broader family circumstances. He also suggested that the palace was using his mother's memory to generate positive publicity. The implications of Harry's statement were immediately clear to Catherine. His public criticism would give legitimacy to media narratives that questioned the appropriateness of her wearing the tiara, and it would ensure that tonight's state banquet would be overshadowed by family drama rather than focused on diplomatic relations with France. More personally devastating was the realization that Harry's statement would be seen as a rejection of her place in the family and her right to honor Diana's memory through wearing her jewelry. The tiara had been offered to her as a symbol of acceptance and respect, but Harry's public disapproval had transformed it into a symbol of family division and controversy. "I can't wear it tonight," Catherine said quietly, reaching up to begin removing the tiara. "If Harry's statement becomes part of the story, then my wearing this piece becomes about family conflict rather than about diplomatic relations or honoring Diana's memory. That's not what any of us wanted. God be America." The three family members immediately protested, with William speaking most forcefully. "You absolutely should not change your plans because Harry decided to make this into a public issue instead of handling it privately. He's been out of active royal service for years, and he doesn't get to dictate decisions about family matters from California." But Charles, with his decades of experience managing royal crises and understanding public perception, seemed to grasp immediately why Catherine felt she needed to reconsider. "If you're not comfortable proceeding, we'll support whatever decision you make. The most important thing is that you feel confident and authentic tonight, not that you wear any particular piece of jewelry." Catherine appreciated their support, but she also understood that changing her appearance at this point would create its own set of problems and complications. The French delegation would notice if she appeared in different jewelry than had been previously discussed. Palace staff had already prepared for extensive photography of the tiara's return to public use, and her last-minute decision to avoid wearing it would generate exactly the kind of speculation and drama she was trying to prevent. "What do you think my mother would have wanted?" Catherine asked William directly, needing his honest assessment rather than protective reassurance. "If she could advise me right now about whether to wear this tiara tonight, what do you think she would say?" William considered the question seriously, drawing on his memories of his mother's approach to difficult situations and her priorities when faced with public pressure and family complications. "I think she would tell you to make the choice that feels authentic to you, regardless of what other people think you should do. She never liked making decisions based on fear of criticism, and she would want you to honor your own instincts about what's right." The answer gave Catherine the clarity she needed to make her final decision. She would wear the Cambridge lover's knot to the state banquet as originally planned, not because she was ignoring the complications or the criticism, but because removing it now would mean allowing external pressure to override her own judgment and the thoughtful family process that had led to this moment. I'm going to wear it, she announced, checking her reflection once more in the mirror. This tiara was offered to me with love and respect, and I accepted it with the same spirit. Every statement doesn't change what this gesture means to our family, or what wearing it represents about my commitment to honoring Diana's memory while serving in my own authentic way. The decision seemed to energize everyone in the room, with Camilla stepping forward to make a small adjustment to how the tiara sat against Catherine's hair. "You're making the right choice," she said firmly. "This piece belongs in public view, worn by someone who understands its significance and who will bring honor to its legacy." As they prepared to leave for the state banquet, none of them could have anticipated that Catherine's decision to wear the tiara, despite Harry's criticism, would trigger the most serious royal crisis in years, involving media investigations into palace security, public protests from Diana's supporters, and a diplomatic incident that would strain Britain's relationship with multiple Commonwealth nations. The Cambridge Lovers' Knot, intended as a symbol of family unity and respect for the past, was about to become the center of a scandal that would test every aspect of the royal family's ability to manage public perception, family relationships, and institutional stability in an era when private gestures could instantly become global controversies with far-reaching consequences for the monarchy's future. King Charles III stood in his private study at Buckingham Palace at 4:30 in the morning, still wearing his formal evening wear from the previous night's state banquet, staring at a television screen that showed rolling coverage of what media outlets were calling the most significant royal crisis since the abdication of Edward VIII. The Cambridge Lovers' Knot tiara, which had sparkled so brilliantly on Catherine's head just hours earlier, had become the center of a global controversy that was spiraling far beyond anything his family had experienced in decades. The state banquet itself had proceeded flawlessly from a diplomatic perspective. The French president had been appropriately honored, the bilateral discussions had advanced several important policy initiatives, and Catherine had conducted herself with perfect grace throughout the evening's formal protocols. But beyond the palace walls, her appearance in Diana's famous tiara had triggered reactions that no one in the royal household had anticipated or prepared for. Social media had exploded with conflicting opinions about the appropriateness of Catherine wearing the tiara, with hashtags supporting and condemning the decision trending globally within hours of the first photographs appearing online. Diana's most devoted supporters had organized virtual protests arguing that no one should wear her jewelry, while Catherine's admirers had countered with tributes celebrating her respectful approach to honoring Diana's memory. More seriously, several Commonwealth nations had issued diplomatic statements questioning whether the timing of the tiara's public reappearance was appropriate given ongoing discussions about the monarchy's role in former colonial territories. The symbolism of British royal jewelry had become entangled with broader conversations about imperial history and cultural appropriation in ways that transformed Catherine's birthday gift into an international political issue. The most damaging development had occurred around midnight London time, when an anonymous source had leaked audio recordings of private conversations between palace staff discussing security arrangements for the tiara transfer. The recordings revealed not just logistical details that should have remained confidential, but also casual comments from staff members expressing doubts about the wisdom of the decision and speculation about family tensions that were never meant for public consumption. Sir Clive Alderton entered the study carrying multiple newspapers, his usually impeccable appearance disheveled from managing crisis communications throughout the night. The front pages he spread across Charles's desk told a story of media coverage that had moved far beyond typical royal watching into territory that threatened the monarchy's institutional credibility. "The Guardian is calling for a parliamentary inquiry into palace security procedures," Sir Clive reported grimly. "The Times is questioning whether the royal family has the judgment necessary to manage historical artifacts responsibly. And the international coverage is even worse. Several American networks are running documentaries about Diana's death alongside footage of Catherine wearing the tiara." Charles reviewed the headlines with growing horror, recognizing that what had begun as his wife's thoughtful gesture toward Catherine had morphed into a crisis that encompassed security breaches, family divisions, historical sensitivity, and international relations. The complexity of managing so many interconnected problems simultaneously was beyond anything in his previous experience as Prince of Wales or in his 2 years as king. "Where do we stand with the source of the original leak?" Charles asked, though he suspected from Sir Clive's expression that the news would not be encouraging. "We've identified the individual responsible for sharing information with the Sun," Sir Clive replied, "but the situation is more complicated than a simple breach of confidentiality. The person involved is a senior staff member who has served the royal household faithfully for over 15 years and who claims they acted out of concern for the family's well-being rather than malicious intent." This revelation added another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation. Dismissing a long-serving staff member who had acted from misguided loyalty rather than malicious intent would create additional negative publicity and potentially legal complications. But allowing the breach to go unpunished would signal that confidentiality around family matters was not taken seriously, encouraging future leaks and undermining the privacy that royal family members needed to function effectively. The study door opened to admit William and Catherine, both looking exhausted from the night's events and the early morning crisis management sessions that had followed. Catherine had changed from her formal gown into casual clothes, but she still wore the expression of someone processing the reality that her decision to honor Diana's memory had somehow created the very controversy she had hoped to avoid. "How bad is it?" William asked, without preamble, though the newspapers spread across his father's desk provided a clear indication of the scope of the problem they were facing. Charles gestured toward the coverage, feeling older and more overwhelmed than at any point since becoming king. "It's beyond anything we've prepared for. The media attention has merged with diplomatic concerns, security issues, and family dynamics in ways that make it almost impossible to address any single aspect without making the others worse." Catherine sank into one of the study's leather chairs, looking smaller and more vulnerable than Charles had ever seen her during her years in the royal family. "I never imagined that wearing a piece of jewelry could create international incidents and parliamentary inquiries. I keep thinking about whether I should have made a different decision, but at this point I'm not sure any choice would have prevented this kind of reaction." Her distress was evident, and Charles felt a surge of protective anger toward the media outlets and commentators who had transformed a private family gesture into a public spectacle. Catherine had handled her royal duties with remarkable grace and commitment, had faced personal health challenges with dignity, and had earned universal respect for her service to the crown. The fact that she was now questioning herself because of media criticism and political manipulation was deeply troubling to him. "This is not your fault," Charles said firmly. "You made a decision based on the information available to you and the council of people who care about you. The fact that external forces have chosen to exploit that decision for their own purposes reflects on them, not on you." William nodded emphatically, though his expression suggested he was struggling with his own complicated emotions about the situation. "The problem isn't anything you did or didn't do. The problem is that we're dealing with people who are willing to use my mother's memory as a weapon against our family, regardless of the pain that causes or the damage it does to the institutions she served." Touched on one of the most painful aspects of the current crisis for Charles personally. Throughout his kingship, he had worked to find appropriate ways to honor Diana's legacy while also moving forward with the responsibilities of the monarchy. The Cambridge Lovers' Knot controversy suggested that some people would never allow the family to evolve beyond the traumas and divisions of the past, preferring to keep old wounds open rather than support healing and growth. Sir Clive cleared his throat diplomatically, indicating that he had additional information to share that might influence their understanding of the crisis. "There's one more development that you should know about before we discuss potential responses. We've received word that Prince Harry is flying to London today and has requested a private meeting with Your Majesty to discuss what he's calling the inappropriate use of his mother's personal belongings." The news that Harry was inserting himself directly into the crisis represented exactly the kind of escalation that Charles had most hoped to avoid. Harry's decision to make public statements from California had been damaging enough, but his physical presence in London would inevitably generate additional media attention and provide opportunities for further statements that could deepen family divisions. More concerning was the phrase, "inappropriate use," which suggested that Harry viewed Catherine's wearing of the tiara not just as a questionable decision, but as something approaching disrespectful treatment of Diana's legacy. This interpretation would make any private family conversation much more difficult and emotionally charged than the already challenging discussions they had been having about managing the public crisis. "When is he arriving?" Charles asked, though part of him hoped the answer would allow for some time to develop a strategy for handling Harry's concerns while also managing the broader crisis. This afternoon, Sir Clive replied, and he's apparently bringing a film crew to document what he's calling his efforts to protect his mother's memory. The optics of that could be extremely challenging, particularly if the meeting doesn't go well. The mention of a film crew represented a new level of public spectacle that Charles found almost impossible to comprehend. The idea that his younger son would document private family conversations about sensitive matters for potential public consumption suggested a complete breakdown of the boundaries that had traditionally protected royal family relationships from external exploitation. William's reaction was immediate and furious. Private family meeting about our mother's jewelry? That's not protecting her memory. That's exploiting it for his own publicity purposes. How is that different from what he's accusing us of doing? Catherine looked up from her contemplation of the newspaper headlines, her expression reflecting a mixture of sadness and resigned acceptance. Maybe I should just make a public statement saying that I'll stop wearing the tiara. Appeal. If that would end the controversy and allow the family to heal, it might be worth the personal disappointment. Her offer to sacrifice her connection to the Cambridge lovers' knot triggered protective responses from both Charles and William, who recognized that capitulating to external pressure would set a dangerous precedent for how the royal family responded to manufactured controversies. But Charles also understood that Catherine's willingness to put family harmony ahead of personal feelings demonstrated exactly the kind of selfless commitment that made her so valuable to the monarchy. Absolutely not, William said before Charles could respond. You wearing that tiara was a family decision made with love and respect. If you give it up now because of media pressure and Harry's theatrical interventions, we're essentially saying that external forces get to dictate our private family relationships and traditions. Charles found himself caught between his roles as king, father, and husband as he tried to determine the best path forward for both the institution and the individuals involved. As king, he needed to prioritize the monarchy's stability and public credibility. As a father, he wanted to protect both of his sons from further pain and to repair the relationships that had been damaged by years of public conflict. As a husband, he wanted to support Camilla's original generous impulse while also shielding her from criticism for a decision that had been made with the best of intentions. What if we approach this differently? Charles suggested, moving to the window where the early morning light was beginning to illuminate the palace grounds. Instead of responding defensively to criticism or capitulating to pressure, what if we use this situation as an opportunity to have a broader conversation about Diana's legacy and how we can honor her memory while still allowing the family to evolve and grow? The suggestion intrigued both William and Catherine, who recognized that taking control of the narrative might be more effective than simply reacting to external criticism and pressure. A proactive approach could potentially transform the Cambridge lovers' knot controversy from a symbol of family division into an opportunity to demonstrate the monarchy's capacity for thoughtful change and respectful innovation. What would that look like practically? Catherine asked, though her tone suggested she was open to considering alternatives to simply weathering the storm or abandoning the tiara entirely. Charles had been developing the concept as he spoke, drawing on his decades of experience managing royal crises and his understanding of how public opinion could be influenced through careful communication and authentic leadership. We could commission a formal exhibition about Diana's jewelry and its significance, with the Cambridge lovers' knot as the centerpiece. Catherine wearing the tiara publicly would be presented not as a casual appropriation, but as part of a thoughtful process of preserving and sharing Diana's legacy with future generations. The idea had immediate appeal because it addressed multiple aspects of the current crisis simultaneously. It would provide educational context for the tiara's significance, demonstrate the family's commitment to honoring Diana's memory, give Catherine's wearing of the piece institutional legitimacy, and offer the public a constructive way to engage with Diana's legacy rather than simply arguing about it on social media. William was nodding as he worked through the implications. That could work, but it would require Harry's cooperation to be truly effective. If he's actively opposing Catherine wearing the tiara, his opposition would undermine the entire initiative. This observation brought them back to the central challenge of the day, managing Harry's return to London and his concerns about the tiara situation in a way that either gained his support for the family's approach or at least neutralized his opposition. A private meeting that Harry had requested would likely determine whether the Cambridge lovers' knot controversy could be resolved through family unity or would continue to escalate into a more serious long-term crisis. As the morning progressed and palace staff began arriving to manage the day's official business, Charles found himself contemplating how dramatically his understanding of kingship had been challenged by this unexpected crisis. He had assumed that his biggest challenges would involve political relationships, commonwealth management, and the gradual modernization of royal protocols. He had not anticipated that a birthday gift between family members could evolve into a situation that threatened diplomatic relationships, constitutional stability, and the fundamental trust that the public placed in the monarchy. The Cambridge lover's knot had become much more than a piece of jewelry. It was now a symbol of all the unresolved tensions and complications that continued to shape the royal family's relationships with each other and with the British public. How Charles managed the remainder of this crisis would likely define his early reign and determine whether the monarchy could successfully navigate the complex intersection of personal relationships, historical sensitivity, and public expectations that characterized royal life in the 21st century. As he prepared for what would likely be the most challenging family conversation of his reign, Charles understood that the decisions made in the coming hours would have consequences that extended far beyond Catherine's birthday gift, touching on fundamental questions about the monarchy's ability to evolve while honoring its past, to maintain family unity while managing individual differences, and to serve the public interest while protecting the personal relationships that gave meaning and authenticity to royal service.